Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Jim Tenuto, Renaissance Executive Forum's business partner in San Diego, California. And we welcome you to our Expert Insights program featuring Chip Conley. Chip is sharing his thoughts on the art of wisdom, reframing aging, and what it means to be a modern elder. Para mis amigos en América Latina y España, les damos la bienvenida a nuestro programa de conocimientos expertos con Chip Conley. Chip comparte su pensamiento sobre el arte de la sabiduría, reformular el envejecimiento y lo que significa ser un anciano moderna. Good morning, Chip.
Good morning,
and
Jim.
I apologize to everyone who had to suffer through that slight bit of Spanglish.
Mi español es muy malo, pero estoy mejorando. But we'll be in English today.
That we will. Chip has a history of with Renaissance Executive Forums that spans about 15 years. He is the only thought leader that we've worked with over the last 30 years who has actually contributed material for 2 strategies for success programs. We first got introduced to Chip when his book Peak, how companies get their mojo from Maslow. I'm all about the modern elder right now. How companies get their mojo from Maslow first appeared. And within several years after that, another book of his, Emotional Equations, came out. So not only has Chip contributed information, he's contributed on both sides of the brain, the left side and the right side. His latest work is The Making of a Modern Elder, and it is the foundation for the creation of the Modern Elder Academy. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to be with you. I feel very fortunate and honored to have a long relationship with Renaissance Executive Forum.
Thank you. So the Miles Kingston, I don't know if he's the originator of the quote, but he's certainly on the web seems to be the originator of the quote. The difference between knowledge and wisdom. He says, knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Let's talk about your rather interesting definition of wisdom.
Yeah, well, first of all, maybe I'll give a little background why even wisdom is interesting to me. To be quite honest, I didn't really think about the difference between knowledge or wisdom. I was a long-time boutique hotelier. I started one of the first boutique hotel companies in the United States called Joie de Vivre, means joy of life, and ran that company for 24 years, from age 26 to age 50, and it became the second largest boutique hotelier in the U.S. with 52 boutique hotels. I sold it. It's now a Hyatt brand. And long story short is a couple of years later, I was in my early 50s. And to quote Robert De Niro in the movie The Intern, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I had music inside of me in my early 50s. I just wasn't sure who to share it with. And I wouldn't have called it wisdom, but that's actually what it was. I got a call from the 3 founders of Airbnb. This was almost 10 years ago. The company was a tiny tech startup in San Francisco. And they said, we want you to come in and help us take this little startup idea and become a global hospitality brand. And so I joined them. And long story short, I became the mentor to Brian, the CEO, who is still almost 10 years later, it's still the CEO of now a public company. And a few weeks into me being there, they pulled me aside and they said, Chip, we hired you for your knowledge, but what you've really brought is your wisdom.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't even know how you define the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So for the last few years, I've been really sort of understanding that, both for 7.5 years at Airbnb as a full-time leader in the company, helping to run the company, and then as a strategic advisor. But then in writing my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, and creating the Modern Elder Academy. The way I now define wisdom is metabolized experience, which leads to distilled compassion. Let me unpack that for a second, and then we can carry forward. So metabolized experience, I think no one would probably disagree with the idea that wisdom often comes from experience. It's hard to learn wisdom in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Some of you who are younger, I'll have to explain later what Encyclopedia Britannica is. But the reality is that the wisdom is something that you learn based upon skinning your knee or breaking your ankle. You learn it through the school of hard knocks. So metabolized experience means you understand which of your experience is relevant and valuable as wisdom. But then the part that actually has become part of my definition in the last year is, well, metabolized experience alone just means that you're wiser for your own sake. But when you reach out and talk to scholars around wisdom, almost always they say, well, wisdom is in the spirit of doing something for the social good as well. And so that's why, metabolized experience that leads to distilled compassion. And distilled compassion basically means like, when your compassion is most going to be valuable. I mean, there's people in the world who are just compassionate to everyone, and I love them, and that's beautiful. And we call them Mother Teresa or the Dalai Lama. But most of us are not Mother Teresa or the Dalai Lama. What we are good at is knowing how do you metabolize your experience and then you apply it in a way that actually is compassionate to those you're helping. And frankly, for me, that's meant often to help young entrepreneurs. And so that is what wisdom is to me today. And in the process of all this, we ended up creating the world's first midlife wisdom school, the Modern Elder Academy.
We had an opportunity to have breakfast actually at Airbnb shortly after you joined there. And what was intriguing was a term that you used, because again, talk about distillation. There was a lot of your thinking was being distilled during that period of time. Talk a little bit about the word mentern, a fine portmanteau word if there ever was one.
Thank you. I joined Airbnb as the mentor to Brian Chesky and the other two founders as well, but primarily Brian as the CEO. Now, I was 52, he was 31. And the funny thing about it was I was also reporting to him. I'd been the CEO of my own company, grew it to 3,500 employees. And now all of a sudden I'm reporting to someone 21 years younger than me. So I was reporting to my mentee. Now that was interesting. And that, if people want to ask questions in the comments, they're welcome to ask questions because that was an interesting experience. And today in the United States, over 40% of Americans actually have a boss that's younger than them, but often not 21 years younger. So what was interesting to me was that I was reporting to Brian, but I was also learning from Brian. So I came in as the mentor, but within a month, I realized I'm the intern here too, because I have never worked in a tech company before. So Airbnb may be a hospitality company, but it is at its core a tech company. And at age 52, even though I lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, a long time, I had never worked in a tech company. So they were talking lingo that I didn't understand. And I had a lot to learn. So Brian and I laughed and said, we have a trade agreement here. Chip offers Brian EQ, emotional intelligence, especially in the context of leadership. And Brian offers Chip DQ, digital intelligence, in the context of me learning how to use my iPhone even better, but also learning how to develop UX and UI for websites, and frankly, how to address a millennial travel population, which at that time was Airbnb's primary market. So a mentern is someone who's a mentor and an intern at the same time. Because actually, here's another thought. they also said to me, the founders did, Chip, you're a modern elder, which at first I was like, I don't want to be a modern elder. Like that's making me feel really old. And they said, no, you're not elderly. You're an elder because you're twice the age of the average employee here at Airbnb. But a modern elder is different. A modern elder is as curious as they are wise. And when I heard that definition, a modern elder is as curious as they are wise, I was like, okay, if that's what a modern elder is, then I will be a modern elder because I am both curious. I don't know if I'm wise, but I do know I'm curious. And so a mentor is curious and wise. When you're the intern, you're curious, and when you're the mentor, you're wise.
I'm going to. I know we've talked about this, but I think it's a perfect segue to one of your dad's comments about curiosity, which really gave me some interesting pause for thought when I first heard it. I know you're a chip off the old block, no pun intended. I know that's where the nickname came from. But
right.
Tell us what your dad said and how we might use that to sort of reframe our path forward.
Yeah, my dad, after I'd been in the company been in Airbnb for about a month or two, I went for a hike with my dad, and my dad was hearing me kvetch. He was hearing me like complain. And I wasn't complaining about the millennials. I wasn't complaining about what I was complaining about was the fact that I felt stupid. I felt like, wow, I sit in these meetings and they're talking a language I don't understand. And my dad was listening to me drone on and on. And finally, my dad, who was hiking ahead of me, turned around on the hiking trail and he just said, how could you turn your fear into curiosity? And I was like, oh my God, my dad might be a facilitator someday in his mid 80s. Well, he's actually in his mid 80s now, but back then he was probably in his mid 70s. And I was like, that's a good point, Dad. I was worried that the last thing I would do in my career would be feeling like I was the dumbest person in the room and I would fail at it. And my fear of failure was actually potentially bringing on the failure because I was feeling stupid. I was not feeling confident. And so I think any of us, whether whether you're running your own business or you're a leader in a company of some size, knowing that fear doesn't necessarily make you more creative. And fear can lead to a self-confidence gap that can actually be problematic. Learning how to turn that fear into curiosity is a beautiful thing. So what I would start to do is I would start asking a lot of questions. And if they were dumb questions, like I don't understand the words that were used in the meeting, I would make a list of them. And then I would ask someone after the meeting. I wouldn't interrupt. But there were times in the meetings where I heard people saying things and it wasn't words that were a problem. It was the thinking that was a problem. But of course, me being the old guy in the room, I didn't want to like be stupid, but sometimes what I heard was like, that doesn't make sense. So I would, instead of sort of saying, hey, that didn't make sense, I would ask questions. So instead of like telling people like the father in the room, that's stupid. Instead, I'd ask questions that helped the other people in the room who are younger than me see, oh, there's a blind spot here. And that process of helping them see their blind spots was part of what people said, wow, we love your wisdom. And over the course of my 7.5 years of time at Airbnb, I had over 100 mentees, partly because people said, we just think of you as like, you're like our practical Socrates here. You're the one who just asks questions, Socratic method, that helps us to see our blind spots. And, that's when I realized that my dad's advice was pretty good because, if you're curious, you do ask questions.
I'm going back to my week at the Modern Elder Academy, and there were many sort of seminal moments, but one of them was this concept, and I think it follows quite well with what we just discussed, of appreciative inquiry. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, appreciative inquiry is not something that we developed. It's something that it's something that we've taught people. I taught people appreciative inquiry at Airbnb, but also we teach it at MEA, the Modern Elder Academy. David Cooper is the best known person who sort of popularized it. The premise of appreciative inquiry is, how could questions be catalytic in opening up possibilities? Now, sometimes questions can be like the opposite. It can shut people down. Think of a situation where a company is losing market share and the CEO comes into the leadership meeting and says, "We're losing market share. Who's to blame in this room?" And it's like, okay, well, that is not appreciative inquiry. That is sort of like, okay, let's look at finger pointing and let's look at cover your ass and etc. So that is the opposite of appreciative inquiry. An alternative way that CEO could handle that is to come in the room and say, we're losing market share to our competitors. What can we learn from them that we could apply? And what are some new ideas we could come up with that would actually help us to get our mojo back? And that's a very different approach. It's an approach that says, hey, what's the possibility out here? So appreciative inquiry is really about how do you catalyze people to think bigger and focus on possibility. The risk in appreciative inquiry or curiosity in general is it's not necessarily the most efficient way of running a meeting because it becomes a little bit of a brainstorm. And yet, if you don't provide space for brainstorming in your leadership meetings, you end up having a business that is a locomotive that's trucking along, but isn't asking the question of whether we're on the right track or not. And, so many companies I know, including my industry, the hospitality industry, got disrupted by Airbnb. Airbnb is the most valuable hospitality company in the world today. And as of about 6 months ago, it's not true anymore, but as of 6 months ago, Airbnb was worth more than Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, Intercontinental, and Four Seasons combined. That company didn't really exist 12 years ago. So, or it barely existed. And so those other companies were locomoting on the same track, but they were actually not brainstorming. And they were not using appreciative inquiry to ask, how might we explore who are our future disruptors and either buy them. I mean, Marriott should have come along. I knew Arne Sorensen, the late CEO of Marriott, and he should have come along. I told him, you should come along and buy Airbnb, which he didn't do. But you need to have that kind of, in the world we live in today where there's more disruptors coming on the scene faster than ever before. Yeah, it's something you need to think about.
We've often had discussions when we talk about competitors in our forum meetings. Tell us about your competitors. It's pretty simple to point out your direct competitors. When we ask a question to follow up on that is, who might your competitors be in the future? These would be these disruptors that are doing it completely different. Stephen Covey.
Another question you could ask yourself, Jim, is how could we disrupt ourselves?
Yes.
I mean, Reed Hastings asked that at Netflix, and that's at the point at which he convinced his leadership team that they really desperately needed to go into the streaming business. Now, back then, they were the biggest player in the market, and they were basically, beating the crap out of, Blockbuster Video. And yet, it wasn't Blockbuster that disrupted both of them. It was Netflix. And Netflix basically put Blockbuster out of business at the point that streaming came along. And so in essence, they disrupted themselves.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, break it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen Covey, in the classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, once said you can't be efficient with people. So this drive of trying to be efficient in a meeting versus using tools like appreciative inquiry or always being curious.
Yeah.
How would you go about helping the people on this call, many of whom are entrepreneurs and CEOs and leaders of businesses, to kind of build into their meetings, getting that distance and being able to ask the right questions to their people?
Well, let me talk. I'll tell you something we used to do at Joie de Vivre when I felt like the company needed a little bit more pushback in our leadership meetings. So for about 6 months, we tried this and it worked. And then we stopped doing it partly because it worked too well. And I'll explain that too. We said that, my first book that I wrote was called The Rebel Rules, Daring to Be Yourself in Business. So we decided that at each weekly leadership meeting, we had about 12 people on our leadership team. One person knew in advance that they would be the rebel of the meeting. So what did the rebel do? The rebel's job was to ask catalytic questions, ask questions that were almost a little bit off the wall or creative, or maybe even not, I don't want to say disrespectful, because we didn't want that, but sort of like, maybe even a little crazy. And the purpose of the rebel, so what it did is it invested in a singular person to have that role. So you had your normal meeting, but you just knew that there was one joker in the room at every meeting whose job it was to sort of be prepared, knowing that what topics were going to come up in advance. So the person has an agenda, knows what's going to be on the agenda, and they're there to help sort of be a provocateur, to help create some provocative questions. It worked really well. Where it actually worked not so well is it did make the meetings a little bit longer at times, because it got us into deeper conversations about things that were not on the agenda. And at some point, we just realized, okay, now that we have so many great ideas that came out of this, let's go execute. And it didn't mean we didn't do it again. We did do it again, but we just didn't do it at every meeting. We did it like once a quarter. And we had quarterly offsites where everybody came to the room as a rebel. So it was not just one person. It was like, okay, the afternoon session for a 3-day workshop or retreat, this afternoon session, we're all rebels. We're all going to think about our business and ask the question, what business are we in, for example, which is a famous Peter Drucker question. And what business should we be in, or could we be in? What business would our customers wish we were in, et cetera, et cetera. And it just allowed us to think more broadly, because at some point we found that the leadership meetings weekly needed to be somewhat efficient, because what the risk in not having efficient meetings is there's not clarity on what we're getting done. And so that's sort of ultimately what we went to. So I get what Stephen Covey's saying about is you don't want to be efficient with people, but you do want to be efficient with processes. And I think processes and people are part of processes. So sometimes you have to be efficient with people because the process requires it. And then other times you don't want to be efficient with people. You don't want to be efficient with someone when you're doing a performance review. You don't want to be efficient with someone when it's a creative brainstorm. You don't want to be efficient with someone when you're actually trying to interview them for the sake of luring them into your business. You want to give space and time for each of those activities.
Another concept that we explored at the Modern Elder Academy was mindset. And can you give us a little, again, not something developed at MEA, but something co-opted by MEA?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about closed versus growth mindset, and how we might be able to move from closed to a growth mindset.
Yeah, and it's fixed. Fixed or closed.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Sort of the same thing. This work comes from Carol Dweck from Stanford, and the premise is, and there are really 4 curriculum pillars at MEA. How do we reframe aging? How do we shift our mindset to a growth mindset? How do we navigate transitions in midlife? And how do we regenerate ourselves and the planet? So the mindset piece of it is speaking to the idea of fixed versus growth mindset. When you have a fixed mindset, your tendency is to believe that you have a fixed amount of talent and your job is to optimize that talent. But it comes from a place of thinking somehow that you can't grow that talent. So when we're growing up, often, like you have a fixed mindset, you're trying to prove yourself and you define success as winning. I don't know about you, but that's how I've often thought of myself, is like, I don't think of success as anything but winning. I'm a big, who was it? The coach of the Chicago Bears, leaders, there's no award for second place or whatever he said. So I was like, okay, that was how I believed in things. But then when I was introduced to the idea of growth mindset, it's not that you're trying to prove yourself with a growth mindset. You're trying to improve yourself. And you don't define success as winning. You define success as learning. And that shift is a huge shift, because when you as an organization say that you're going to be focused on improving and learning, what it does is it opens up the possibility of getting better and believing that you don't have a fixed amount of talent. And it's really important. If this is a particularly important thing, it's particularly important as we get older. Because as we get older, the truth is there are some things we're not as good at. And if you only play games that you can win, what that means for you as a leader or just as an athlete or whatever you do is you will do fewer and fewer things. Your sandbox gets smaller and smaller if you only are going to do things that you can win. And that it leads to a very boring life. And it leads to, frankly, often very calcified, limited thinking. So this is a particularly important quality for people as we age, because if you're not willing to become a beginner again and try something new, it's a problem. So let me use an example. So one of the questions we like to ask at MEA is the following. What is it that you know now or have done now that you wish you had known or done 10 years ago? So think about that for a moment. What is it that I know now or wish or have done now that I wish I'd known? I'm 61. So what do I wish I'd known around when I was 50? Well, there's a lot of things. Once you've got that in your mind, then ask the question moving forward. What is it that I will regret if I don't learn it or know it now? Or learn it or do it now. Now, when I asked that question 4 years ago, this is what led me to start learning to surf at age 57, because frankly, at age 67, it would not be any easier. Additionally, it's what led me to learning Spanish, because I live in Mexico part of the time. I was like, wow, you know what? I should be learning Spanish. Estoy mejorando. I'm sort of the mindset, like, it's not going to be easier to learn Spanish at 67 than it will be at 57. And I plan to be living in Mexico for a very long time. I love it here. So long story short is that question allows you to anticipate the regret. Anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. To imagine the regret and say, it would not be wise to do that thing, or I should do that thing because I'll regret it if I don't. That is what leads you to taking action and having the growth mindset to say, I can become a beginner and go out and learn. So highly recommend, Carol Dweck's work on mindset, or come on down to MEA and learn more about it at our campus.
Many years ago, in my Wall Street days, I had run into a woman whose husband had passed away right after he retired. And we were sitting in the office, and this is the advice she offered me: never worship at the altar of regret. Which I thought was very interesting. And based on what you just said here, what are you going to regret not doing, as opposed to what do you wish you had done? It's that pull push. It's that pull push thing.
Well, there's a bunch of social science research that shows that as you get older, the regret of what you didn't do is 2 to 3 times more painful than the regret of the things you did do and you wish you hadn't done. So often it's the omission. It's the thing that you wish you'd done that you didn't do.
We should all be channeling our inner Frank Sinatra, who once said, regrets, I have a few, but then again, too few to mention. Let's move along. You had a rather intriguing photo that you shared a couple of weeks back. You were all gowned up in a hospital, and you had a copy of a book, Ikigai. Tell us a little bit about that and how that's made an impact on your thinking recently.
So Ikigai is a Japanese theory of, in essence, purpose. And it comes from the idea of you exist on this planet for certain reasons. And one of the challenges in life is to discover what those reasons are. Or as someone once said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of your life is to give it away. So Ikigai speaks to the idea that there are it's a Venn diagram with 4 circles. What you love doing, what you do well, what you can get rewarded for or paid for, but I like to say rewarded for, and what the world needs. So if you take those 4 circles, and they're sort of like north, south, east, west, on a page, right in the center is your Ikigai. the idea that if you can find the thing you love, that you do well, that you can get rewarded for, that the world needs, you have discovered something that is of immense value, not just to you, but to the world. And frankly, that means whether you're doing it to make money or as a business, or whether you're just doing it because you love to do it, and the world needs it, that is what we all strive for. And so Ikigai is a part of us. We have a purpose course, an online MEA purpose course that's designing your purposeful path to work. And Ikigai is a big part of it. And what's interesting, Jim, is if you go out and study Ikigai, it's spelled Ikigai. If you go out and look at on Google, there's really almost no good Ikigai tests that help you to understand, like, how do you get to the center there? And so we actually created a diagnostic with MEA that we now use in our work, in some of our workshops, and we use it in our purpose online course that helps people to understand, okay, how do I score on what I love to do versus what I do well versus what I could be rewarded for versus, what the world needs. And it helps people to understand, okay, is it balanced? Is it high? Is it low? And you can think about it, whether it's your existing thing you're doing or the thing you're thinking about doing. That's where I think it's particularly valuable. When someone says, I have this inkling, that this idea I want to do for a business or for a new career path or whatever, Jim, it could be you for what you're doing, in having had a very storied career on Wall Street and elsewhere. And then you came to become, one of the, it's like a person who's a facilitator, confidant, with Renaissance Executive Forum. It'd be interesting if you had known about this at that time. You could have done your own little Ikigai test to say, okay, is this a good fit? And I will tell you, having seen you and witnessed you, you're spectacular at it. So, and the world needs it, and you do get rewarded for it. And I think you love it. So, it is your Ikigai. Now, I'm not saying you're an Ikigai. If I say you're an Ikigai, that means just you're a guy who's sort of icky, like icky. But no, you're not an Ikigai.
I'm currently in the middle of Marshall Goldsmith's new book, The Earned Life, and there was
I have it.
And there was something I want to get back to, but there was someone that once told me that you should reflect in the end of the week and write down things that you learned. I don't know who that guy is, but anyway, we'll get back to that in a second. His little wisdom book. Yeah, it'll be you. One of the things I wrote down last week was, and this kind of, to me, it gets in the way of us even thinking about purpose or Ikigai or the intersection of those four circles, which is what Marshall Goldsmith calls the misery of obligation. So there's things that we think, it just stunned me. I had to get up and walk around after I read that.
The acronym for that is MOO. MOO. The misery of obligation.
And it's this thing that, I look at my dad, and he always felt, well, I got to provide for the family. I got to do this. I got to do that. I have to, I should. And I think a lot of us get trapped into that. And until we step back and really focus on those four areas and how they might intersect, it's a challenge for people to get to that point with their purpose. So again, interesting stuff at all. As Woody Allen once said, history may not repeat, but it rhymes. So a lot of this stuff, you just keep going and going, wow, that's fairly interesting. You have been known to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard quite often. And there was one of your posts, and I want to talk about the wisdom well. One of your posts last year, you were reflecting on how much you had written every day, and there was a rather enormous number of words that you shared with us during that period of time. Do you recall that particular post?
I don't remember the number of words. What I do know is that so Wisdom Well is the Modern Elder Academy's daily blog, but it's really my daily blog because 75%, 80% of the blog's posts are mine, but they're also from our alumni as well as our faculty, as well as my co-founders. we are just about to publish our 1000th daily blog. So if the average daily blog is, I don't know, 500 to 750 words, you can figure out how many words we've written or I've written in the last 2.5 to 3 years on the blog. I love, I've written 5 books and I love writing books, but books, sort of are a little bit archaic in the sense that how many people, the percentage of people, I once saw a statistic, the percentage of people who read a leadership or business book to the last chapter is 12%. It's sort of like online education. If you see in online education, the number of people who get to the final week of content is alarmingly low. So when you think about that, it's like, okay, man, and if you have all the best stuff in your last chapter, only 12% of people who even buy the book see it. So that's what led me to creating the blog and having, a little microdose of wisdom every day that people can actually tap into. It. It's free. You just get a morning email from us if you subscribe to it. And I guess for me, the thing I think is important is, how do you make things actionable? I love turning a phrase. I love being an inspiring, speaker or writer, but I really want to make it practical. How do you make wisdom practical? And that is really a big piece of what we try to offer in the blog. So yeah. And how do I, like, today's blog was all about Jane Goodall, the famous, she was like hung out in Africa with chimps, and like, what did she say about wisdom, and what can we learn about Jane Goodall's perspective? And, and so that I love that my process of writing, it just allows me to go out and research the topic of wisdom, knowing that we live in an era, I'm going to pull up for those who that's my iPhone. My iPhone has all of the knowledge in the world on it. We are awash in knowledge. What is scarce often is wisdom. And so, it was Peter Drucker who in 1959 said that the future of future of organizations will be ruled by knowledge workers. And like, no one had any idea what he was talking about, because basically what he was saying is that people who can utilize knowledge and information technology, especially computers, to help make better decisions are going to be more successful. And, today, 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world are knowledge companies. They're tech companies. So I think it's time to retire the term knowledge worker and replace it with wisdom worker. And so anything I can do to help elevate the value of wisdom in the world, and through this blog, Wisdom Well, is to me serving the population, so I'm or serving society in my own tiny little way.
So you have, tell us a little bit about the habit of reflection at the end of the week and adding to what must be a rather large body of work now. What you call your wisdom book, some people call a common book.
Yeah, over the years, I've been given so many like journals or diaries from people. Everybody seems to think that Chip needs another journal. Like, in the era we live in right now, like, what's a journal going to do? I can just go on Google. I could do a Google Doc. But back in what year? It was 1989. So 1989, I had one hotel in San Francisco. Ultimately, I had 52, but started with one. And that little hotel was in trouble because in the Loma Prieta earthquake in October of 1989 led to no one coming to San Francisco for 6 months. I mean, it was a ghost town. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm 28 years old. I think I've made a big mistake of being in the hotel business. And so what I did is, every weekend I took one of my journals and I wrote my wisdom book on the front. And every weekend I would sit down for half an hour and I would write down, like, in a bullet point format, what did I learn that week? Like, specific things. This was not a journal. This was not a diary. It was not Chip emoting. It was more Chip reflecting on what did I learn? And I did that, and I did it for 30 years. And I did it. Ultimately, it became a Google Doc. But bottom line was, the value of this is I can't explain how immensely valuable it is to reflect upon what you learned this week. I'll give you a simple example, which is so obvious to me at age 61, but was not obvious to me at age 30. If you're going into a meeting and you need to have your leadership team supportive of an idea you have, imagine the two people on your leadership team who are going to be the biggest critics. Go and meet with them one-on-one to explain the idea before presenting it at the meeting. Because guess what? They may have their finger, but you may actually adapt it a little bit based upon their suggestions. Now, that is metabolized experience. That is learning your lesson based upon doing it the wrong way and having your critics come into the meeting and basically commandeer the meeting and say, this idea is terrible, Chip. And because they didn't feel like they were consulted in advance. So that's an example of one bullet point that might be in my weekend bullet points that I would take that and say, okay, lesson learned. And the people I know who are the most wise are the ones who have taken their lessons and incorporated them into their life and how they operate, and then taught it to other people. And so my wisdom book, really, who knew at age 28, I would ultimately be creating, a wisdom school and a blog called Wisdom Well. But back in when I was 28, I titled it my wisdom book. And, that was the first of 9 books that I created before I went to Google Docs. And when I say books, these are like handwritten books for myself, never published them, etc.
Yeah.
But a lot of the wisdom that was in them found their way to both my leadership practices as well as the books I wrote for the public.
So there's a word that always gets people thinking, sometimes in a way that you meant and sometimes in a way that you didn't mean, but it's the word elder. So if we were talking about elders, immediately prior to the book and prior to reframing it as we're doing here, when I heard elder, I heard someone who should be revered, someone who lived a long life, and we should revere them and honor them. But that doesn't seem to be what today's elder wants, needs, or offers. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, in certain societies on the planet, elders are still revered, but it's few and far between. And we live in an era where people, where kids are more respectful of Google than grandpa or grandma. That's where they get their knowledge or seemingly their wisdom. So I don't, in sort of repackaging the word elder and adding modern at the front, modern elder, a little bit of a twist. It's not about reverence, it's about relevance. So reverence comes from the old school perspective on our elders. Let's revere and respect our elders. I still think that's a beautiful premise. And yet it's just, I'm not trying to take us back to an era that doesn't exist anymore. What I am saying is, how do elders stay relevant? And that's why the curiosity mixed with the wisdom is important, because you can have all the wisdom of the world stored inside of you, but if the way you approach at 60 years old, the 30-year-olds who work with you is, hey, Sonny, come sit with me and let me tell you about how the world works. Yeah. So that is like, it's not wisdom, it's war stories. And, war stories are valuable if they are helping to make a point that's relevant in this era today. But often someone's war stories are just an opportunity for them to feel like someone's listening to them. And, that's where the okay boomer thing comes along. Okay boomer is like younger people just saying, okay, boomer, I hear you about how the world works and you don't need to tell me anything more. And that is the risk. And this is why I'm fascinated by intergenerational collaboration. I think that young people can learn from old people, and I think older people can learn from young people, and every generation has something to bring to the generational potluck that we call today's workplace. And the question is which companies are getting it right. And Airbnb got it right, but they got it right partly out of just like realizing they'd hired this old guy, but they didn't do it because they wanted the old guy. They did it because they thought I had the knowledge they wanted. But ultimately, we created an employee resource group called Wisdom at Airbnb for older employees there, because only 10% of the employees of Airbnb were 40 or older. That was like 5 years into me being there. So it was like, it's a younger population. So I think, and then there's a lot of companies that have intergenerational collaboration, employee resource group or affinity groups as well, just to sort of say, hey, get a bunch of diverse people around a table, age diverse people. Diverse in any kind is good, but age diverse may even be better, because the young brain thinks differently than the older brain. That is science. That is data. That is what social science or neuroscientists tell us. So when you have a bunch of brains at the table and they each think a little differently, you could either have the best of all worlds or the worst of all worlds. And for many companies, they've got to curate it in such a way that the best of all worlds is what comes out of it.
Let's shift gears and talk about the Modern Elder Academy. So the book comes out, and you're thinking about creating this space for people to do many things, either take a look at a new path in life from a liminal period some transitional period in their life where they're moving from quote unquote the real world into retirement, or perhaps into a different relationship. Let's talk about the Modern Elder Academy, some of the programs, and please feel free to talk about the program that we'll be sharing at Renaissance Executive Forums and the Modern Elder Academy in April of 2023. So,
absolutely. So, well, as I was writing my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, down here in southern Baja, so it's in Mexico, I had this Baja aha one day, an epiphany, and the epiphany was, why is it that we don't have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have a place where people in the middle of their life can actually come and learn how to navigate the transitions of their life, maybe repurpose themselves, reimagine a new path? And because in many ways, we sort of like fuel up with all of our knowledge, in college or maybe in graduate school. And then we go, trucking off, driving our car of life, and then not imagining that there's not a pit stop along the way where we need to refuel. And so that's how MEA came about. And we coined it the world's first midlife wisdom school. We now have 2,500 alumni from 40 countries who've come to our program, and it's pretty amazing. And we've had lots of famous people too. Blake McCoskey, who started Tom's Shoes. Well, he's going to teach with me this fall, but he actually came as a student. Richard Rohr, the famous Christian mystic, he's written 52 books. He came as a student for Lynn Twist's The Soul of Money workshop. So, I mean, it's really fascinating to see how people can sort of renew themselves. We have MEA, the actual campus where we do workshops. We also have something called sabbatical sessions where we do a little bit of lighter programming, and it's a great place for people to do a wellness vacation or remotely work. That's this summer, if people want to come this summer. And then we have MEA online with both an 8-week purpose course and an 8-week transitions course. And for REF, for Renaissance Executive Forum members, we, in a recent newsletter, we offered a 15% discount on any of those programs, and you can find it in the most recent newsletter, if I'm not mistaken. We are very excited about the fact that next April, the week of April 24th to 29th, it's a 5-night program, but people can come a day early or stay a day late for no additional cost. We're doing a Renaissance Executive Forum workshop here just for REF members at MEA in Baja. I love this because I know your members. I love your members. I've met lots of your members over the years. And so knowing the mindset of the members and then mixing that with what we do with our MEA programming is great. And so I just want to say, I think it'll fill up pretty quickly. I'm not exactly sure how people sign up. Maybe, Jim or somebody else there on your team can sort of say, here's how you sign up. Maybe there's a link you can put in there. But all I can say is I'm looking forward to seeing you down here April of next year. It's a great time of year to be here as well.
Yes, it is. I want to check in with our folks who are running this for us. Are there any questions that have come in that we have time for a few questions? Are there any questions that have come in that Chip may address? Well, yes, said Sophia. So Sophia, please share one of those questions with us and we will get right on it.
I see a question here from John Affleck. He says,
take a look at the comment screen. Okay.
To affect retiring knowledge worker to wisdom worker, what's the key to affecting that transition? Well, let me try to answer that, John. So, well, first of all, companies need to get clear on the value of wisdom. The good news is there is a growing body of work in academia that's showing how institutional wisdom in a company is exceptionally valuable, but undervalued, because what many companies tend to do is spend their learning and development dollars often on the youngest and the newest employees in a company. So there's the president of the Harvard Alumni Association, a woman named Vanessa Liu, is starting a company that I'm supporting her as a mentor and as an investor, that is actually going out to companies as an enterprise solution to help them understand the value of wisdom and wisdom workers. So you'll hear more about that. It's called SugarWorks. There's no website for it yet, but it'll be coming out soon. Then there's companies like Mentor Cloud. Mentor Cloud is a company based in Silicon Valley, and their whole premise is, gosh, within a company, you have the older employee who wants to learn one thing but knows this, and the younger employee who wants to actually learn this thing but knows that, and they're like a yin and yang. They're like puzzle pieces that fit together. Guess what? Mentor Cloud actually creates the ability for them to actually create a mutual mentorship relationship. So I actually think, and we live in an era where retention is exceptionally important. Deloitte has shown that when millennials have a mentor in the company, they are twice as likely to stay 5 years or longer in the company. So mentorship in a company is not just a great way of doing knowledge or wisdom transfer. It's also a way of boosting retention. So these are a lot of things, but I think we're on the path toward wisdom workers becoming part of the jargon in the business world. I'd say in the next few years. What's the emotional equation for modern elderly? Well, first of all, I wouldn't call it modern elderly, because I think that's someone who's really old. Modern elder, is there an emotional equation for a modern elder? I know that's a good question. Who was that who asked that? Felipe. I don't know if there's an emotional equation for modern elder, but I think a modern elder is, if a modern elder is one part wisdom and another part curiosity, I do believe that one of the things we get better at as we age is the alchemy. When do I offer a little more curiosity or a little bit more wisdom? When do I offer a little bit more gravitas? And when do I offer some levity, like some humor? When am I an extrovert versus when am I an introvert? So I would say that whatever emotional equation would define the modern elder, it would probably be something around alchemy and definitely around wisdom and curiosity. Let's see. Here's another question from Pablo. Wisdom may have a universal reach. However, the local domestic intricacies usually overwhelm decision-making. How do you address these realities? I wish Pablo was here. I could answer that better if I understood a little bit better. What I think is true is this. Knowledge is, I'm going to say something. This is a wisdom well post I posted last year. Knowledge is local. Wisdom is global. Now, let me unpack that for you for a second. Knowledge is quite specific. The fact that someone is exceptionally knowledgeable about a particular subject matter does not make them wise. It actually, what it means is that they are a subject matter expert and particularly valuable. And we need those people in our businesses. They're the experts. They're the ones who are have the expertise to be able to solve a particular challenge. We are living in an era, as evidenced by David Epstein's book Range, where generalists are starting to make a comeback. We have lived in an era of specialists, and it's been specialized knowledge, localized knowledge. And when I say localized, I don't necessarily just mean localized geographically. I mean, it's specific. Wisdom is global. And what that means is that if you're wise, you can apply the wisdom you have to any problem. Knowledge is not that way. Knowledge is often quite specific to a particular domain. This is part of the reason why wisdom often has to do with human instincts. So wisdom is often about pattern recognition. It's the more patterns you've seen, the more you recognize patterns. And the older you are, you've recognized more patterns. And many of the patterns are your own patterns, or there's patterns of other people. So one of the things that we get better at as we get older is our emotional intelligence. That is a fact. Our IQ doesn't grow with age, but our EQ does. And therefore, I think wisdom can be very valuable in just about any kind of circumstance. I think it's almost time. So
it is almost time. Anything you want to anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share, or some closing thoughts?
I mean, I'd love if this is interesting to you, to be a free subscriber to Wisdom Well, check out the Modern Elder Academy website, and definitely look at the link for the April workshop next year. But if you don't want to wait till next April, I'm actually coming in the fall. We're going to do in November. We're going to do a workshop, like an online workshop. So we'll make that available to everybody for free. But also just, I mean, if you want to come down to MEA before then, we'd love to see you, especially for those of you who want to come this summer for a little vacation. Come to our sabbatical sessions this summer and use your 15% REF benefit for 50% discount.
So we do have an intriguing question here from Rodrigo. What exercises or routines would you suggest to build your sort of growth mindset muscles?
I would say the number one thing I would suggest is, well, first of all, I'd read her book. I'd read Carol Dweck's book. But I would also say, once a quarter, what's something that you can learn anew or learn for the first time even? How could you become a beginner again? Because a growth mindset requires less self-consciousness and an openness to try things even though you're not very good at them. So because it says, I want to learn and I want to improve. And so the process of becoming a beginner, it could be something as simple as saying, I'm going to learn how to juggle. I'm just going to juggle. And that's the thing I'm going to learn this quarter. Or it could be learning how to cook a souffle. Or it could be, as Peter Drucker did, every 2 years, he studied a new topic that had nothing to do with his career that he just wanted to learn and become one of the world's leading experts on. So become a beginner at something. That will lead to a growth mindset.
And I believe one of those things that Peter Drucker studied was raising bonsai trees.
He did.
Yes.
He did. He had exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's not Ikigai, but it's Ikebana, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Chip, for spending an hour with us.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to thank everyone who was responsible for helping put this call together: Fabrizio, Sophia, Carrie Ann, and everyone at Renaissance Executive Forums, and certainly everyone who took an hour out of their day to share it with us, and hopefully get a little bit of wisdom from a true modern elder. So, Chip, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you. All right. Hope to see a lot of you in April next year, if not before. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.